What happens when a 40-year-old retired man who smokes cigars, drinks whiskey, and gambles like it's a sport decides to return to the NBA? You'd expect a complete disaster, right? Well, not if that man is Michael Jordan. Sure, most people remember him for the 6 rings, the 5 MVPs, and literally becoming one of the best players on the planet. But they often forget about his final chapter, when one of the greatest players of all time came back with all of his bad habits and still managed to dominate players half of his age. So why did he come out of retirement anyway? And how did he pull off one of the most overlooked comebacks in sporting history? Well, to find out, we have to go back to June 14th, 1998. After Michael Jordan and his Chicago Bulls failed to capture their 6th championship in just 8 seasons, they had no choice but to try and win the 1998 title on the road in Utah during either tonight's matchup or in Game 7. However, it wasn't just the fact that Chicago was a single W away from yet another NBA championship which made this moment so huge.
We all know that this is Jackson's last year in Chicago, and Jordan has made it very clear that if Phil leaves, he's leaving too.
But why would their head coach be leaving? Well, Jerry Krause, the Chicago Bulls general manager who had helped find and draft players such as Scottie Pippen, as well as build Chicago into a 5-time championship winning dynasty, saw a much different future for his Bulls.
We've seen how Jerry made statements that feel that, if he wins all 82 games that he won't be returning.
I seem to remember some comments when Michael retired from Jerry that he said that his dream is to win a championship without Michael.
Therefore, as the clock wound down in Game 6, many felt that this would be the last time they ever saw Michael Jordan on the court. However, with the Bulls still down a point, there might actually be one more final matchup.
Crowd gets quiet. The moment starts to become the moment, for me. And that's what we've been, that's part of that Zen Buddhism stuff, the moment, once you get in the moment, when you're there, things start to move slowly, you start to see the court very well, you start reading what the defense is trying to do, and I saw that moment, and when I saw the moment, the opportunity to take advantage of it when Russell reached, and I took advantage of that moment.
Open, Chicago with the lead! If they don't, for the 2nd straight year, they go out in 6. Stockton. Harper's on him. Behind the screen. Harper got a piece of it. It comes off. The Chicago Bulls have won their 6th NBA championship, and it's their 2nd three-peat.
I am here to announce my retirement from the game of basketball. It won't be another announcement to baseball or anything to that nature.
Michael, is there any chance whatsoever that you'll change your mind somewhere down the road and return?
No. I never say never, but 95, 99.9%, I'm very secure with my decision.
Yet, because this wasn't the first time Michael Jordan had retired, fans speculated that he would in fact eventually return to the game of basketball, a thought only made more concrete by his former head coach. As once Phil Jackson signed on to lead the Los Angeles Lakers before the 1999-2000 season, many began linking the pair. And when Jordan was in attendance for a Lakers game in late 1999, speculation skyrocketed. But do you want to know what the crazy part about this speculation is? Fans, we're actually right. Michael Jordan was in fact set to return to the NBA during the 1999-2000 season. Only this time, he was coming in as a team president, as well as becoming a minority owner under the majority shareholder, Abe Pollin, for the Washington Wizards. But why, at 36 years old, was MJ not returning to an on-the-court role? While Jordan wasn't technically a part of their playing roster, Michael was still heavily involved with his young Wizards side on their practice court.
That's my job to the game, is pass on things to help players improve as individuals. I've done it with Desmond Mason, I've done it with Antoine Walker. And it's not that I'm trying to gain an edge. I'm trying to improve the game of basketball. I've done it with Kobe Bryant, left and right. And that to me feels like that's an obligation I have to the game.
So how did Michael Jordan perform anyway in his first year as team president? Well, Washington spent their 2000-2001 season essentially cleaning house, moving key players such as Juwan Howard and waiving veterans like Rod Strickland as they pivoted towards youth. Decisions which would lead the Wizards to hold one of the NBA's worst records. only winning 19 games. But this horrific season did have a silver lining, because due to being one of the lowest teams in the league, it was Washington who ended up holding the #1 pick in the 2001 draft, a selection that they used on high school phenom Kwame Brown. However, in his first full year as team president, Jordan was starting to get an itch. The time he spent on court mentoring young players such as Richard "Rip" Hamilton began to plant a seed in Michael's head. So, after signing his own former head coach from his early days with the Bulls, Doug Collins, Jordan had a huge announcement to make.
Michael Jordan makes it official and says he is indeed coming back to the game he loves. Of course, last week he announced in a release that he would be rejoining the Washington Wizards as a player.
Inspired by NHL player Mario Lemieux, who had made his own return to professional hockey late in his career, Jordan, who was nearing his 40s and after a 3-year hiatus from the NBA, was set to return to the court for the Washington Wizards. But doubt that he would even be successful started to creep in.
Now, Hansen said the other thing that will be the same about Michael Jordan, his competitive drive, his absolute will to win. And of course, Chris, that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out as he goes to a team that only won 19 games last season.
And even with MJ's explanation, many questioned what was the point of his return.
He briefly explained his intentions today, writing about the opportunity to teach his young players and help them elevate their games to a higher level. He says there's not a better way of teaching than to be on the court during actual NBA games. It will be a 2-year deal with the Wizards for the veteran minimum of $1 million per, and he's going to donate this year's entire salary to the relief efforts surrounding the terrorist attack.
And would this impact the incredible legacy that Jordan had left behind? October 11th, 2001. In his first preseason game, wearing the blue Wizards away uniform, Michael Jordan began his return as if he never left.
Then on the hard drive, blocked away by Jordan.
And a few minutes later, MJ did this.
Being guarded again by Corliss Williamson. The pump fake, as convincing as he wants it to be.
As this exhibition game against his old rivals continued, one thing became very clear. This was not the Jordan we were all used to seeing. No, something was different. Because Michael's insane athletic ability, which once allowed him to dunk the ball from the free throw line, was no longer there, but had been replaced by another skill, one that was on full display in their preseason game against the New Jersey Nets, because the Wizards would find themselves down by nearly 20 points early in the second quarter, and Jordan knew, playing for the first time in front of Washington fans, that he had to lead them back. So, slowly but surely, MJ began to score.
Drive by Dial. Here's Jordan. Yes.
However, now that he had lost most of his explosive power and was essentially playing on just a single leg due to intense knee tendonitis, Jordan had to use his basketball brain to find openings. Michael would now utilize far more fakes, attempting to get his defenders off balance and then find openings to get off his deadly mid-range jump shot. But this change in playstyle wasn't even the craziest thing on display during this preseason event, as not only at almost 40 years old would Jordan do this,
Jordan with the step.
but Michael would incredibly bring his young Wizard side all the way back into the game.
It was 28 here in the third. Jordan again! A three for Jordan! It's a 2-point game!
While MJ's insane night would be cut short by head coach Doug Collins in an effort to preserve him for the regular season, Michael had achieved something insane.
Here's Jordan on the pull-up. 15 and 22, 41 points from Michael Jordan.
Yet, could he actually perform in the regular season? October 30th, 2001. Washington is set to face the New York Knicks in MJ's favorite arena, Madison Square Garden.
I'm nervous in every arena that I go in because I know and I can feel the expectation of the fans. And I've learned in years of playing the game of basketball is that you're never going to be able to live up to what their expectations are. So I have to set my own expectations and live up to those, and hopefully at the end of the day, we all are happy.
Not only would Jordan score his first true NBA bucket in his second return, but he was showcasing something that many fans were afraid he might have lost.
By Anderson and by Harrington. And Michael makes it work.
You see, after winning the 1998 title, MJ, rightfully so, was celebrating and enjoying his retirement. But wanting to enjoy a cigar, Jordan unfortunately severed a tendon in his right hand index finger when using a cigar cutter, an unlucky incident that raised questions, including from Michael himself, if he would actually be able to shoot the ball properly in his return. But with just 20 seconds remaining and down 3, the Wizards would need that jump shot if they were going to leave MSG with a W.
Wizards down by 3. Jordan for the tie. Rebound by Kurt Thomas.
So how would MJ respond? 2 nights later, in his second official night as a Wizard, Michael opened this game in standard Jordan fashion.
32-year-old Emmanuel Davis, and Jordan hits his first shot.
However, it's what happened a few possessions later which truly shocked everyone. But before I play it for you, just keep in mind that this is an away game in Atlanta.
Saved by into Michael Jordan.
After throwing down an in-game dunk at 38 years old, MJ would continue to light up the Hawks defense.
Clubbing the Wizard. Michael Jordan right between the eyes.
And even showcased a vintage up and under layup. Not only would MJ end this night having dropped 31 points.
You expect to feel this good in the second game of the year? 31 points?
Hey, my rhythm is coming. I still didn't shoot the ball particularly well like I wanted to, but I got some good rhythm. I made some tough shots. I even dunked the ball again. So, I mean, my rhythm's coming, and it's a long season.
But his Wizards would be heading back to Washington with their first victory. However, despite winning their next matchup, something was clearly wrong with Michael's game, because Jordan was only shooting 37% from the field, a fact that when combined with the Wizards' 5-game losing streak, saw many begin to believe that the Jordan experiment would be a failure. Yet, was this really the case? Was Washington actually doomed to miss the playoffs? And would MJ's legacy as Air Jordan turn into Floor Jordan? November 16th, 2001. In Michael's first game against Utah since he buried their franchise in 1998, knew that it was up to him to steer the Wizards' ship back in the right direction. Once again, MJ began this must-win game by smartly using the threat of his scoring to find an opening in the mid-range. And as the night progressed, it was clear something had changed. Because it didn't matter what the situation was, whether it was the clock winding down,
2 seconds to shoot. Jordan baseline.
or the Jazz sending multiple defenders.
Baseline, same play. Got it again.
Michael Jordan was, as usual, cooking Utah's defense. But as the clock wound down in Washington, irregardless of MJ's insane night,
44 points, an NBA high so far by a player this year.
It was the Jazz heading back to Salt Lake City victorious. To make matters worse, as November was coming to a close, Jordan and his Wizards had gone on the longest losing streak of MJ's career, failing in 8 straight games. Things were so bad that not even their head coach could think of a solution, and Michael's hope of turning his floundering franchise into a playoff team seemed impossible, or was it? November 28th, 2001, in Jordan's first matchup against the 2001 NBA MVP Allen Iverson, MJ knew that he had to turn things around.
Fans behind us screaming, "Come on, Mike, take it to him."
So, in what was becoming standard fashion, Jordan continued to dominate by smartly using his footwork and his bag of tricks.
MJ again, got another one!
Which ultimately allowed the Wizard star to drop 30 points, as well as leading Washington to their first victory since the start of the month. A performance which would see the Washington Wizards begin to turn their 2001-2002 season around. Over the course of their next 12 games, the Wizards would incredibly win 10.
Play by Sprayweller has the 5. Here's Michael firing and hits with 3 and 2/10 seconds remaining. Now Jackson inbounds. Here's Houston for 3 and he hits it, but it's all over.
Improving their record to 2 games above 500 and keeping their playoff dreams alive. However, what happened in their late December game against the Pacers truly shocked everyone.
We played the Indiana Pacers, and we were down 25 at the end of the third quarter. And I took Michael out of the game, and I said, "Look, Michael, I know you think we can still win this game, but we got to play, in 2 nights. And if we make a little run, I'll put you back in the game." Well, we didn't. Well, I found out that after the game was over that he had 8 points in the game, and he broke a streak of like 860-something games in double figure. He got on the bus and he said, "Scoot over." And he looked at me And he said, do you think I can still play? And I said, absolutely. That's why I'm here, to be here to help you. He said, you know, to be my coach, you have to believe in me and believe I can still play. And I said, Michael, I believe in you. He said, you did the right thing tonight. You did the right thing tonight. I don't care about the points, but I needed to know that you believe in me. We play the New Jersey Nets the next night. And Michael scores the first 3 times he has the ball. Byron Scott takes a timeout, and Michael comes over and says, I want the ball right there the rest of the game, and don't take me out till I tell you. And so that's fine by me.
Here he is again. Off the glass. Scored! In control with 8 seconds to shoot. Pulls up. How about Jordan?
2 minutes to go in the game, he gives me the sign like, that's enough. I take him out of the game. He walks over to the bench. I said, Michael, what happened tonight? He said, well, the guy who was guarding me was told me his back was hurt. Don't ever tell me you got a problem. He said, I'll make you pay for that. 51 points later.
But do you want to know what's even more shocking than scoring 51 points at 38 years old? In the Wizards' next game against the New Jersey Nets, Jordan's dominance only continued, as Michael would not only draw and one jumpers.
Jordan draws contact, and it goes! A sensational shot by Jordan!
Finish beautifully in and around the hoop.
What a move, Jordan. Oh, tremendous shot!
Score his jersey number in points during the first half, but incredibly score 22 points in a row without missing.
He got another one. 22 straight.
MJ, after having the worst game of his career, had dropped 51 and then 45 against the Nets. A truly insane series of events, and things only continue to get crazier. Because in Jordan's first matchup against his old team, Michael did this.
Michael Jordan, the 4th player in NBA history to get 30,000 points for his career.
And if you assumed that MJ scoring his 30,000th point was the main highlight of this game, you would be wrong, as what happened during the second half was truly insane.
Play to Mercer. Mercer on the run. What a play! What a defensive play! A 2-hand block, steal, game, set, magic.
While most look back on Jordan's time with the Bulls and remember his insane offensive moments,
into the circle, puts the shot in the air. Good! The game's over, and the Bulls have won.
MJ was truly gifted on both sides of the floor. All the way back in 1998, not only was Michael named as the league's most valuable player, but he had also been crowned the Defensive Player of the Year, a skill that still remained during his second return. Because despite what many assumed, that Jordan, thanks to the loss of his athleticism, would have lost a step on that side of the court, Michael still retained his physical strength and defensive IQ, attributes which would help MJ transform the Wizards into one of the better teams on the other side of the ball during their 2001-2002 campaign. However, of course, it was always his offensive talent which ultimately carried his squads, a skill set that was on full display as his Wizards faced off against a young Kevin Garnett and his Minnesota Timberwolves.
Working on Garnett. Close by him and tries! Oh, vintage Michael Jordan!
I had to guard them. Was 40. Man, I got like 38 of that. He was too dribbling. You know, I ain't too slow.
Damn.
Whatever. Whatever. Watch out. They wasn't even in no triangle. He started making up the triangle as he was doing that. Set it right here. No, watch out. Whatever. Man, you know, what? That motherfucker took that. He came out one time, shot that motherfucker so high, I jumped, and I was just like, oh, I can't even. Oh, man.
And as January was coming to a close, Jordan would once again shock Cavalier fans.
So here we go with 1 6/10 seconds left. Wizards need the bucket for the win. Jordan the jumper. Got it! He got it at the buzzer! Jordan does it to Cleveland again!
Were you a little surprised at how wide open?
I was very surprised I was wide open. I just tried to set a good screen to force him to switch. And the better screen that I could set, the more open I could be. But I was surprised how open I really was.
Despite a rusty start, which, let's be honest, for a retired 38-year-old who had spent 3 years partying is kinda expected, Jordan was beginning to figure things out. Not only was he fulfilling his goal of teaching the next generation,
Michael was fun. He had a unique personality.
Great to be around.
Great to be around. Like when I was on the basketball court at times with him, he would show me the whole medium range game. Like he would dribble 2 times, pull up in the middle of the court and say, "Hey, Rick, get that in your game. That's the hardest play in the game of basketball to guard.
Yes, sir.
But then there was also another side where it was the talking trash Michael Jordan. And at times, me and a couple of the young guys would come up to him and say, "Hey, Mike, why don't you think about putting us in the brand Jordan collection?"
Right.
And he'd look at me and say, "Hey, Rip, my sneakers for all stars."
But his 25.1 point, 6.2 rebound, and 5.1 assist averages had guided his young Washington team to hold a 25 win and 20 loss record, well on their way to achieving Michael's other goal, the postseason. However, what happened during their final game before the All-Star break would change everything for Michael Jordan.
Off the glass, what a shot! And he's down and he's hurt. He hurt his knee. He's trying to get up to run it off.
Yet, Jordan, as he had done countless times during his career, just fought through the pain. Michael would not only appear in the 2002 All-Star game just days later, but upon returning for the rest of the regular season, would do this against the Phoenix Suns.
Michael Jordan with 4 seconds. Fakes, shoots.
He did it again! He did it again! Man, how you let 40-year-old Jordan hit the game winner on you, Matrix? Come on, man.
However, the pain, even after sitting out a game to recover, was truly too much. Jordan was forced to have a knee surgery in an attempt to ease the discomfort he was in, resulting in MJ potentially missing the remainder of the 2001-2002 season. While Michael would eventually return 11 games later and still manage to score 34 points in 26 minutes against the Bucks, literally on one leg, his knee issues were getting serious.
He's back on the shelf again, as first reported by ESPN's David Aldridge on Wednesday. Michael Jordan left the team in Milwaukee Wednesday afternoon. He was placed on the injured list and will miss the remainder of the season.
To make matters worse, without their superstar, the Washington Wizards slid further and further down the standings. And once their season came to a close, the Wizards had ultimately failed to enter the postseason. Whilst MJ's return to the NBA had helped Washington add an impressive 18 wins, his injury had many wondering, could he actually help this team make the playoffs? And would he even play next season? Well, before fans got that answer, Jordan, still technically the team's general manager, would trade away Rip Hamilton in exchange for an all-star in Jerry Stackhouse, as well as bringing in Larry Hughes and former mentor Charles Oakley. Michael would also confirm with fans that this, the 2002-2003 season, would 100% be his final time in an NBA uniform. A fact which brought the 6-time champion peace. This season would allow the former face of the NBA a chance to get the farewell tour that he missed out on during his 1998 season. However, Jordan had some serious battles to face if he was going to appear in the postseason one more time, and it all began on November 8th, 2002. Jordan, who spent the early part of his final season coming off the bench, opened his night by scoring with his mentee, Kobe Bryant, draped all over him, an exciting matchup that only continued all game long.
Spins, fade away, good! Wow!
As this battle was coming to a close, thanks to MJ missing 2 crucial free throws, the Lakers had incredibly taken a 1-point lead after being down double digits earlier on. The Wizards had just 2.9 seconds remaining to steal this W, and you know exactly who they were going to give the ball to.
Final look. Russell gives it back to Stackhouse. Oh, he did not!
First of all, let's talk about that last play. You guys had so little time to set it up. What happened?
Well, I figured everybody was going to focus on me, and I was going to rub off the post guy and give him a chance to step up, and Jerry was going to cut off of him and have a good shot at it. I missed my free throws. He saved me tonight.
Yet, a few weeks later, against the Philadelphia 76ers, in Jordan's first game back as a starter, it would be MJ, with 5.4 seconds remaining, who got his chance to grab a victory for Washington.
This time they go to MJ. Jordan, can he do it again? Underneath, knocked away, ball on the floor, that's your ball game.
With the Wizards falling to 6-10 thanks to Jordan's failure to put them over the hump, many began to doubt if the near 40-year-old could actually still play.
Really? Oh, so that's how you're gonna play it. You gonna do this? Okay, fine. That's all I needed. That's all I needed for him to do that, and it became personal with me.
December 3rd, 2002. Knowing full well how vital it was for Washington to win this game against the Milwaukee Bucks, Jordan came out and focused on something different. MJ, facing rising star Michael Redd of the Bucks, would take a much more simple approach to the game, moving off the ball,
Inside MJ, who lays it in.
looking to draw fouls,
Getting the assist.
or finding open space with easy one-dribble pull-ups in the mid-range. A mindset shift that resulted in the near 40-year-old scoring 25, but most importantly, knocking down the first domino in what he hoped would become a Wizards season turnaround.
We need to get a win. It doesn't matter how they play. We got to play good, and we're going right back into Detroit tomorrow, and hopefully we can feed off of this.
1 week later, in his first and only matchup against former teammate Scottie Pippen, Jordan continued his form.
His angles were a little bit more sharp. You know, you wasn't going to move him. He was a strong 2-3 guard. You wasn't going to just move him lightly. And his shot became more dangerous. You know, he became more solid as that veteran player when his years in Washington, as the question stated. He's still out there talking shit. Oh, you know what I'm saying?
But regardless how Michael seemed to his opponents, Washington was still trending downwards. Because not only would the Blazers send them packing, but since their victory against Milwaukee, the Wizards had only gone 2-3, a poor effort which saw Washington 4 games below 500 and out of the playoff race. Perhaps as he neared his 40th birthday, Michael should hang up his Jordans and head back upstairs. December 17, 2002, Washington is in Atlanta, and MJ is hungry to prove to everyone that he can in fact carry his Wizards side into the postseason, and he did so the only way he knew how.
It was so incredible because it was such a master of art, how simple he just made the game. It's just playing off jab steps, pump fakes.
Not only was he destroying defenses with simplicity, but it was the same old taking everything personally mindset which truly made Jordan.
This is what he said after scoring just 2 points on a 1-9 effort against Toronto. I don't want anybody to think I can't score. I can score if I want to. I can go, and if I can score 2 and we win, I'm happy.
Michael would not only round out this must-win game with an insane layup, but having scored 30 points and most importantly grabbing a W. But this was only the beginning. In the following night against the Memphis Grizzlies, MJ would continue to decimate defenses with his pure scoring. Jordan's almost impossible to guard fakes would see the 6-time champion drop another 33-point game and grab a second victory in a row for his Wizards. But as Washington entered 2003, they were still below 500, having only won 15 whilst racking up 17 losses. If the Wizards were ever going to make the playoffs, it became clear to Michael Jordan that he was going to have to enter a whole nother gear. January 4th, 2003, in another matchup with rival shooting guard Reggie Miller, MJ started his night how he often did.
4 shots, Jordan's fade away.
However, it's what happened in the second half which truly stunned everyone. And no, it wasn't his Globetrotter-esque floor Jordan pass, it was this.
Go streaking, baseline, no foul.
Not only had Jordan dunked all over Pacers big man Jermaine O'Neal, but it was MJ who would score the 2 crucial buckets in the game's second extra period, 4 points which improved his scoring total to 41 that helped Washington to grab a vital W. Michael would then continue to average 18.3 points over his team's next 5 matchups, allowing the Wizards to finally grab a true 500 record for the first time in their 2002-2003 campaign. And things only get crazier in their next matchup versus the Orlando Magic, because Grant Hill, the Magic's all-star forward, had suffered what should have been a season-ending ankle injury, but he wanted to guard his hero one more time. So Jordan, being Jordan, did this.
When I tell you he torched me in that first quarter, like literally he gave me 20 points in the first quarter on the same play. Like he just ran the same play every time and did this, like, you know, and I could not guard him. And so literally I checked out of the game at the end of the first quarter and I didn't even go to the bed. I just walked back to the locker room. Like I was done. Like literally had surgery like a couple days later.
MJ's 32-point effort, which essentially ended Grant Hill's season, placed his Wizards above 500 for the first time that year. Perhaps their postseason dreams would actually come true. Well, as the team headed towards the All-Star break and their superstar's 40th birthday, the team slid all the way back down to 4 games below 500. which included a poor 11-point performance in Michael's final appearance at the United Center in Chicago. To make things even worse, as the group prepared to battle the Charlotte Hornets, the Wizards would be without both Jerry Stackhouse and Larry Hughes. Therefore, Michael Jordan, who was just weeks away from his 40th birthday, began to score at will against Charlotte. He was scoring jumpers from behind the backboard, hitting beautiful pull-up shots, and finding himself at the rim for easy layups. Jordan was so dominant that even the announcers were in shock.
Jordan sloughs it down, and he's 14 for 24.
I don't know how much longer he can do. I mean, he's actually just carrying the offense.
And once again, not only did the Wizards leave with a huge W, but MJ had dropped an insane 45 points.
Michael Jordan, the greatest player of all time, when they needed him, without Stackhouse and without Hughes, comes through in a gigantic way.
So now that Washington was just one game below 500, could they actually make a playoff push? Well, before we got to find out, Jordan was set to appear in his 13th All-Star game as a starter, after Raptors star Vince Carter gifted the legend his starting role.
I have passed on the things that Dr. J, some of the great players, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, has passed on to me. I pass on to these All-Stars here, as well as the rest of the players in the NBA. I thank you for your support. Now I can go home and feel at peace with the game of basketball.
Fans would then be treated to a back-and-forth battle between mentor and mentee in what many viewed as the passing of the torch.
I know where you're going. You got to get up quick. If you knew where I was going, why you go for the fake? Mike, after you face the ball, where else you going to go? You just left your feet. Yeah, but where else you going to go?
In the game, I go for you.
I spun all the way around.
I go for these ribs right here.
However, after returning from the pause in play, Washington just kept losing. Michael Jordan, who had turned 40 on the 17th of February, had no choice but to try his best to step up against the New Jersey Nets in an attempt to salvage their season. February 21st, 2003, Michael Jordan, the man who had retired twice, only to return both times to the game he loved, truly never gave up.
Look at that! The 40-year-old dives to the hardwood.
It didn't matter how much pain Michael was in, or the fact he had lost a step athletically. MJ was focused on one thing and one thing only: winning. And with 40 seconds to go and down one, the Wizards needed that focus more than anything.
Jordan drives up and in!
Make them take the shot inside the line.
Jefferson, jumper, missed it! Wizards hang on for the victory!
Mike, can you score 40 every night? You're going to have to get Jerry involved. You're going to have to get these other guys involved, I would assume.
Man, I only got 28 games left in my career. I'll do whatever I got to do to get to the playoffs.
Michael Jordan's truly insane drive to succeed would never stop, as during their late February matchup against the Houston Rockets, Jordan just kept putting his 40-year-old body on the line. While MJ did miss the game-winning shot at the end of regulation, his insane and one over 7'5" Yao Ming
at the point. Here's Jordan backing Mobley. Jordan challenge. Yeah, it counts for the foul.
And defensive effort in overtime would save his Wizards and net them a much-needed victory. However, unsurprisingly, at 40 years old, Jordan's body began to break down, with the superstar being forced to leave their matchup versus the Toronto Raptors early with back spasms. A reality combined with Jordan dropping an insane 39 points versus the New York Knicks in early March, but still losing, had many, even those within the Wizards, realizing that Washington's season was truly heading downhill. Because despite Michael Jordan averaging just over 21 points, 6.7 rebounds, and 3.8 assists as Washington made their final playoff push, the Wizards would ultimately fail to achieve their postseason dreams. For the actual final time in his career, Michael would say goodbye to the game he loved.
It's time, it's time. And I've seen a lot of people say my first time, my second time. This is the final retirement. You don't have to worry about me putting on another uniform, but and I feel it.
And reflect on his incredible 15-year NBA career.
And tonight just brings back, what impact you've had on people, not just in Chicago, not just in Washington, D.C., but everywhere that you played. And to hear them yell and to hear them pay their respects that way, I mean, it's a chilling event, and it felt that way. I felt proud about what I've done over the years. Playing the game.
But Abe Pollin, the man who had allowed Jordan to be a part of his franchise, would have the final say in MJ's Wizards career. because despite having an alleged verbal agreement that Michael would resume his minority stake and team president role during the 2003-2004 season, Abe ultimately fired Jordan. While Michael Jordan's 2-year stint with the Washington Wizards didn't translate into more championships or even a playoff berth for the franchise, many look back on this short tenure with joy, because MJ, who played pretty much on one leg, almost managed to carry the Wizards into the postseason during his initial campaign before his injury. And during the 2002-2003 season, at 40 years old, Michael had incredibly appeared in all 82 games. Jordan's insane Wizards tenure truly makes you think, if Phil Jackson had returned in the 1998-1999 season, would Michael Jordan have won another championship ring? Or did he retire at the perfect time? Let me know what you think below. Also, did you know that one of Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls teammates literally regularly ditched their team to go and party in Las Vegas, as well as spending all night and day celebrating with celebrities before important games, and was still somehow one of the best players on the floor? Insane, right? To find out just how Dennis Rodman was still such an amazing player despite his off-the-court habits, and how a sweet innocent boy who was raised in Dallas became such a party animal, click the video on your screen now.